Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, The Complexities of Shipping Humanitarian Aid. I'm Dave Hartman, the Senior Program Manager of Global Aid at Flexport. I'm very excited to be hosting this discussion. For the folks in the audience who ship commercial cargo, I think you glean a lot of insights into how an organization that deals with so many time-critical shipments does that successfully. And for the international development and aid logisticians, you'll get great insight into how one of, if not the preeminent humanitarian supply chain organizations deals with the same challenges you all face day to day. Before we begin, let's cover a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you'll see a sidebar. It's right of the main stage. If at any time you need assistance during the live webinar, please message us in the help chat located there. You can also ask questions via the Q&A tab on the sidebar. We have some time set aside at the end of the webinar, and we'd love to hear from you. You can enter those at any point in the discussion. Please get them in as they come up. And in the menu above your screen, you have two tabs. In the first tab, you can download a copy of today's slide deck. And in the second tab, there's a brief feedback survey for this webinar. We love your feedback. Please fill that out before you exit the webinar today. A brief legal note, please keep in mind that all information provided in this session is based on the situation at this current time and may not be customized to your specific business requirements. We always recommend reaching out to a Flexport expert to discuss your particular situation. By way of quick background, Flexport.org is the social impact arm of Flexport. Our team focuses exclusively on the movement of nonprofit and humanitarian cargo. So we support organizations like UNICEF, the International Organization for Migration, and Save the Children, in transporting relief supplies to emergencies ranging from Ukraine to Yemen to Somalia. Again, my name is Dave Hartman, and I'm the Senior Manager of Global Aid Programs for Flexport.org. I was a founding member of the team here in its first operations hire, and prior to Flexport, I spent 5 years with Save the Children in a variety of roles. I deployed to emergencies in Iraq, Liberia, Nepal, along with short assignments in Jordan, Indonesia, and for Hurricane Sandy and the Sandy Hook Elementary tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut. And now for the rest of our speakers, we have some fantastic folks here lined up from UNICEF. So first up is Gisela Henrique. She's the Deputy Director of Operations of Supply Division. She oversees all operational support to UNICEF Supply Division, leading the areas of finance, administration, ICT, internal and external communication, private sector partnerships, and strategic planning. She has over 25 years of professional experience, bringing expertise in designing and implementing strategies to drive organizational efficiencies, including organizational development and design and change management, overseeing finance, strategy, operations, and performance across various offices. And then we have Musunda Kasande, who is the Regional Supply Advisor for Middle East and North Africa UNICEF. Welcome, Musunda. Musunda has over 25 years of experience in operations and end-to-end supply chain management in very diverse contexts, including roles in UNICEF Middle East and North Africa, UNICEF Lebanon, Nigeria, and Supply Division in Denmark, and the UN in Tanzania, as well as with UK-based private sector giants like Capgemini, Citigroup, Nokia, and Ericsson. Currently serving as Regional Chief Supply for UNICEF MENA, she's responsible for providing strategic direction to 21 countries, and very complex countries at that, which we'll get into in a bit more, driving innovation, strengthening systems, responding to humanitarian crises, and offering risk-informed solutions and hands-on technical support in highly complex, emergency-prone settings. She holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and law and an MBA. Quite diverse there, Musunda. And David Ashley, my colleague, is the head of Flexport.org and one of its founding members as well. David leads Flexport's impact team, overseeing its humanitarian relief operations and programs, global partnerships, and growth strategy. David helped expand and deepen Flexport.org's impact, leveraging innovative solutions to increase and expedite the delivery of aid supplies around the world. Overseeing a wide range of programs, including the Flexport.org Fund and Product Donation, David also empowers commercial clients to mobilize during disaster responses and fill the gap in humanitarian needs. David has been at Flexport for 9 years, leading operations and account management teams across the company and working with a wide range of commercial and nonprofit shippers. Prior to joining the logistics industry, he worked with nonprofit international development agencies and refugee organizations. And we're going to start here with a quick video that's going to give us a nice little background on UNICEF. For those of you who I'm sure you're familiar with, but it's a wonderful video, so we'll roll that in 1 second.
UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund. We've spent over 75 years doing big things for the smallest among us. 8 decades of building an unprecedented in human history global support system for the world's most vulnerable children. From our very start in the aftermath of World War II, we've tackled the biggest challenges, been there when the stakes are highest, answered the cries heard around the world. But those great challenges are just a small part of what UNICEF does and of what's needed today. Millions of children don't make the evening news. Their problems are systemic. They lack health care, education, or safe water. They deal with chronic challenges that don't go viral on social media. The biggest thing that UNICEF does is help those unseen children as they bravely, quietly try to improve their own lives. Their stories are just as important because those children are just as important. Support for UNICEF's mission must include support for every child, from the newest born through the age of 18, starting with the most vulnerable, but inclusive of all children. No matter their circumstance of birth or the politics of their parents, every child has rights and deserves a fair chance in life. UNICEF is unique among humanitarian organizations. It vaccinates approximately half the world's children in any given year. Its supply system has been built to reach the most remote areas on the planet in under 72 hours. It does whatever it takes to keep billions of children healthy, educated, protected, and respected as we pursue achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. This relentless effort has enabled UNICEF to save and meaningfully improve more children's lives than any other humanitarian organization in the world. UNICEF. We won't stop working for every child.
Amazing video, incredibly inspiring. And I think we can flip over to a poll briefly here as well. I really want to dig into a little bit and just make sure, A, folks are awake, and dig into a little bit about the impact that UNICEF makes. So in 2023, how many countries did UNICEF deliver emergency supplies to? Go ahead, click your answer, and we'll get that up on screen, the answer shortly. Okay, I see like we're getting answers in as they come in. Obviously, there's a huge range here, and a lot of folks are going pretty accurate here. 162 is a huge number of countries. That is the number of countries they do operate in, but the correct answer is 81. So UNICEF delivered emergency supplies to 81 countries globally, emergency supplies globally. So as we saw in the video, huge reach there, and just an incredible amount of coverage that UNICEF is required to have. So we can flip into a little bit more here and actually begin our discussion, which I'm really excited to do. So I know my very first interaction with UNICEF was as a child trick-or-treating to raise funds for UNICEF with one of those delightful little cardboard boxes and raised a lot of quarters and pennies here in the US. But obviously been familiar with UNICEF for my entire humanitarian career for about 15 years. So I'd love, Gisela, to hear a bit more for folks. What is UNICEF's role in the humanitarian sphere?
Well, thank you, Dave, and thank you for having us. So, UNICEF exists to actually support and defend the rights of every child around the world. And we work around five core areas. The first one is to help every child survive and thrive, meaning that every child has access to vaccines, to medicines, to nutrition, so that they can grow healthily. The second one is that every child has the right to learn, which means they can go to school and they have access to the supplies that are needed for them to attend school. The third one is that every child can grow protected from violence or any form of exploitation, so that they have a safe environment for them to grow in. The fourth one is actually that they have a safe and clean environment, which entails, making sure that they have access to clean water and to an environment that is enabling them to grow healthily. And finally, that every child has a fair chance in life, which means, that there are other things that we need to make sure that are in place so that every child can grow healthily. And when you mentioned your trick-or-treating, that's a big part of the work of UNICEF as well, which we do a lot of fundraising, right, from the private sector and collaborating with the private sector. So thank you for doing that as a child, Dave.
My pleasure. It's a huge mandate that you have. There is a massive global reach, and I think too the range of programs and advocacy and support that you do provide is just incredibly impressive. We're going to be a bit focused here on the humanitarian side of things. So I'm sure folks have been watching the news lately. There's a large number of humanitarian crises globally. Can you share a bit more information about some of those crises, and particularly the impact that they're having on children?
Yes, no, thanks, Dave. And it's great that Musonda is here because Musonda is actually one of our regional advisors that is dealing with, I think, an unprecedented number of emergencies in the region that she leads. But globally, we have never seen such a number of emergencies affecting populations around the world, whether they are conflict based or health emergencies or even climate related emergencies. So the number and the scale and the impact of these emergencies has been really, unfortunately, unprecedented. They're affecting more and more children globally, and that makes our work even more important. To give you a little bit of some figures to grapple with. Only in 2023, UNICEF had to respond to 412 emergencies globally in 107 countries. Looking ahead in for 2025, we're looking at a need and a potential impact of 213 million children being affected by humanitarian crisis. So these numbers are just staggering and really, really big.
Yeah,
Musada, I don't know if you want to add. Sorry, Dave.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Gisela, for that intro. I mean, as you've rightly mentioned, the impact of these crises, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa, has been especially severe. In Sudan, for example, the ongoing conflict has created the world's largest child displacement crisis, leaving millions of children without access to food, water, or education. We all have children. I don't know if we can imagine our children going without all of that. This crisis has led to alarming rates of malnutrition, child marriage, because of this is a coping mechanism, and the displacement of entire communities. Over 90% of children in Sudan have been denied their right to education due to the conflict. And you can imagine the toll that this will take on the next generation. Similarly, we're all watching the news. Places like Gaza, Yemen, and Syria, children face the dual threat of conflict and extreme poverty. In these regions, emergencies have compounded existing vulnerabilities. So things were not great already, and then add to that, you have all these things happening: psychological trauma, healthcare, lack of access to healthcare. And now we see the complex and transnational nature of these emergencies, so which makes humanitarian responses all the more challenging. And us having to deal with all the more complex supply chains. In this regard, of course, the in-kind freight donations that we have received from Flexport have been invaluable. And really, on behalf of the children in the Middle East and North Africa and globally, we really take this opportunity to extend our appreciation to you at Flexport for the support. You are helping us to save lives.
Well, thank you for that, Masana. And I think it's you do a great job there of explaining that we use some of these really large words of protracted emergencies, complex crises, but if you zoom in, there's individual children and families in need, right? And so it's easy to get lost in the massive numbers and to the number of countries that are impacted, the types of emergencies, types of sectors that need support. But there's individual children who just need help, and they're children, so they need all of the support. They don't just need. There's not an education child or water child. All children need education, hygiene, safety, security, et cetera. So really appreciate that. And I'm curious if you two could expand a bit upon what is supply division's role here. So we're talking about these large crises. I think a lot of folks who may not be familiar with humanitarian operations may not understand what is the role of supply chain in resolving these issues or helping address those needs.
No, that's a great question. So, actually, supplies and having access to essential supplies is absolutely vital for a child to be able to realize their rights. In particular, in humanitarian situations, we see that having agility and being able to reach children does make a difference between life and death. So having those supplies available, medicines, access to water and sanitation in a humanitarian crisis, it's really the priority for UNICEF when we start a response. In addition to that, I don't know if many of you know that actually UNICEF is the largest vaccine buyer in the world. We buy vaccines. We buy actually annually about 2.8 billion doses of vaccines per year, which reach about 45% of all kids globally. So that is a massive undertaking. And for us to be able to do that, we need effective supply chains because without effective supply chains, we're not going to be able to reach those children. In 2023, I had already shared with you that we had to respond to a massive number of emergencies globally, and we had to move supplies worth of in the scale of $890 million, which is quite a significant number. And as I said, we do need to have these effective supply chains so that we're able to move these goods across the globe timely, with agility, and in a cost-effective manner, right? But we don't work only in emergencies. Emergencies is one part of the work that we do. We also work in development. So the data that I shared with you on vaccines, it's very much honed into the development work that we do in defending kids' rights, and also in reducing their vulnerability and their resilience to when shocks are impended upon their lives. So having a healthy child, they will be better prepared, right, to face an unfortunate event of having to be displaced or having to move away from their house due to a flood. So a child that is healthier is a child that will be able to sustain or to survive better, these shocks that we're seeing and that are increasingly impactful around the world.
Sure. So there's a large portion of the proactive approach here as well. So it's not just reactive to emergencies. There is a lot of work going up front to ensure that children and their families are in the best possible position. Um, a lot of logisticians in the call right now. And so I'm very curious, and Musunda, I'd love to hear from you as well here, but like, what are some of those common logistical hurdles that we face when we're shipping humanitarian aid across borders, particularly in the Middle East, North Africa region, which has been a hot spot for crisis and for the last, call it 20, 25 years? What are some of those issues that we do see? Because we are trying to do incredible work here, but challenges, as every logistician knows, are part of the game. What does that look like for you?
Indeed, indeed. Shipping humanitarian aid across borders to all the 190 countries that we work in, um, and to the increasingly complex environments where we are required to operate is a challenging process. You can just imagine the web of supply chains that we're dealing with. And we do absolutely have to navigate a wide range of logistical hurdles in order to deliver for children. There's so many layers from the political to the technical in order for us to move supplies. In terms of some of the actual challenges that are faced, of course, if I speak for my region, the insecurity, instability, and unpredictability. So having to constantly be ahead of the game and anticipate, as Gisela has spoken to, the work that goes in to preparedness and system strengthening in order to be as ready as we can be to tackle these challenges. Other things we're dealing with, the controls and regulations, including customs clearance procedures that can change overnight as situations rapidly evolve. We saw how quickly things moved in Syria in a matter of days. Border closures, frequent border closures, and so really just not knowing what's going to happen there. We also saw recently, for example, the disruption in the Red Sea, which threatened access to critical supports, including Port Sudan and the port of Hodeida in Yemen. So really a web of challenges that we're having to anticipate. However, we have become rather astute at anticipating hurdles. Like I said, a lot goes into preparedness, being agile and managing risk is core to our operations, as despite all the complexities, we have to ensure that the supplies continue to flow to the children in need. So we really have to be as ahead of the game as we can.
Really appreciate that insight there. I think on my side, seeing as a humanitarian logistician as well, the experience really plays a huge part in this of just being able to anticipate types of things that may go wrong and trying to hedge against those as best as possible. And when you do have experience in logisticians who are shipping to 190 countries around the world, you do wind up with a really large pool of knowledge to draw from. That you can learn from and can share knowledge. So that's really important there too. And I'd also say too, it really resonates that there is no other option, right? This is a mandate that we have. There are folks in need. There isn't just a, well, it's difficult to ship there, we're going to turn that country off. We just have to find the way. So, David, anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I think Masenda explained it really well. The key challenges. I guess the 2 points I'd want to just emphasize is that humanitarian shippers face all the same problems that regular commercial shippers face with increasing costs, customs complexity, capacity issues, except it's just amplified. It's just even greater given the destinations we're shipping to, the complexities on the ground, and how things change so rapidly. And then, we talked about all the different places UNICEF ships to, but you also have emergencies that pop up that are unplanned, and you don't have a program there. You don't have an existing supply chain there. So you have to kind of put these up together, establish new lanes on the fly, new partners, new consignees, figure out import permits and regulations. So it's just even more complex and more difficult to respond to these crises.
Yeah, in an industry filled with question marks, there's just more question marks that we have along the way. So appreciate that, David. And we're going to kick it back to you in a second. But just a reminder, folks, we have the Q&A section here as well. Get in any questions that you do have. We'd love to hear from you and answer questions that you do have. But David, can you share a bit more about Flexport.org's role in responding to these emergencies and supporting organizations like UNICEF?
Yeah, certainly. So we leverage what we do best, shipping and logistics, to empower UNICEF and other organizations to deliver humanitarian supplies to where it's needed most, efficiently, and on time. We take all of the capabilities and technology that Flexport has, and we can combine them with our dedicated humanitarian focus and expertise to unlock impact and allow organizations to focus more time on their programs and the other parts of their supply chain. We've also built up various programs that complement these core shipping capabilities and aid expertise in order to further support their relief efforts. So 2 I want to focus on just quickly. One is our product donations program, where we take excess inventory from our commercial clients, we match the cargo and ship it to our nonprofit clients, which helps increase the amount of supplies in humanitarian responses, and also fills in gaps in needs lists. We've also raised over $50 million for our Flexport.org fund, where we provide in-kind transportation to cover the shipping costs for UNICEF and other organizations. This has a lot of benefits. By saving them costs, we allow these organizations to put those funds to procure more supplies in an emergency, or put those to their programs. They can also move more quickly in an emergency instead of having to spend time at the start to fundraise or try to figure out where they can reallocate budget, so they can just deploy more rapidly in a crisis. And then probably my favorite way the fund really unlocks impact and helps groups is with gift-in-kind donations. So for gift-in-kind donations, typically what happens is a company will offer to donate goods, but they're not going to agree to pay for the corresponding shipping costs to actually deliver those goods to where they need to be. So with the fund and in providing, covering the cost of transportation, we can really step in and help fill in the gap.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, David. And we've kind of alluded to this a bit. But what are the risks that you see more on the operational side? We know there's the humanitarian impact side of folks not getting vaccines, not getting food aid, not getting water, hydration, whatever it may be. But what are some of the risks we see operationally from delays or from just that are inherent to shipping humanitarian cargo? And how do we work to mitigate those?
Yeah, so a lot of the same risks we talked about with costs and capacity and customs, things changing on the ground. I guess there are a few things you can do to help mitigate this and respond appropriately. So you can start, outside of a disaster beforehand, building strong operational processes that account for this complex and unpredictable nature. You can then identify weaknesses or gaps in that plan and your capabilities and work on strengthening them or improving processes. We do this regularly at flexport.org with our disaster relief program and figure out, where can we be stronger, where are needs that we want to improve, so we're prepared in advance and trying to, predict the unpredictable. Then when crises do occur, you want to move quickly. Masanda mentioned this a bit earlier, but you want to be fast to hopefully avoid some of those risks and kind of changing things that happen at destination where there's customs or capacity. And then as things undoubtedly change, you want to be agile and shift your plan accordingly. You can, of course, as you mentioned, Dave, try to predict some of these risks and anticipate them. A couple examples, I think, where we've done a good job of this over the years, particularly in disaster responses. One is with our COVID-19 response. So at the start of the pandemic, we were getting a lot of requests from our nonprofit and aid partners. It was pretty clear, what was happening with PPE and other supplies being needed. So we immediately went and procured a lot of space out of China. And so a few weeks later, when capacity got really crazy and rates were really high, but people just couldn't ship out, we had that space. We had those charters. We had those BSAs in place. So we were just consistently shipping cargo and could get things into where it was needed. Another example is with our Ukraine response. At the start of the conflict, when we were shipping into the country, we actually set up a supply chain that ran through Hungary, which is a bit different than where most shippers were going in through Poland. But we found that our route had a much better transit time because it avoided all the congestion that was kind of sitting on the Poland border. A lot of trucks backed up for many days. We then changed this later on, though. So the next year, when capacity and kind of congestion eased up in Poland, we started shipping through Poland as well in order to save our partners costs. So you want to have a plan, you want to be agile, things are constantly changing. So you kind of try to do your best given the difficult situation.
Agile and innovation. We keep hearing those words, agile, 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 and I think that is critical here. And I'd love to flip us to the next slide. Given all of these complexities, what are some of the ways, Gisela and Ruslan, that we can be more agile and innovative? What are some of the specific projects and programs that you're working on?
Thank you. Innovation sometimes can be found in the simplest of solutions, right? You can imagine that for us to move all these vaccines worldwide, that picking them up from the suppliers is one aspect of the work, but then making sure that they are being imported and they are going through the regulatory requirements within all the different countries that we work with, it's another complexity. So what we're doing at the moment in order to facilitate and understand better this work is that we're mapping over 100 countries regulatory requirements so that we have a view to strengthening their own systems to simplify these processes and to make sure that these vaccines, for instance, they reach the kids that they are meant to faster and more agile manner. In addition, we may think that digital processes are something that are there and they are available everywhere. And that is unfortunately not the reality that we have to deal with. A lot of the processes to bring supplies into national systems sometimes are not yet digitalized. So we are collaborating with governments to improve their own internal processes by digitalizing them and making sure that they are integrated into the national existing platforms so that we can process all these supplies in a more agile manner. And then finally, I want to mention this because I think it's very important. UNICEF is an organization that works very closely with the governments and partners, and we are on the ground. And we have already been sourcing a lot of the services and the supplies closer to where the needs are. So localization, as we call this specific agenda, is a very important agenda for us because it implies not only being able to source the goods locally and make sure that they are closer to where the needs are, but also making sure that the national supply chains that are required for us to move these goods from port to the child, that they are efficient, effective, and that they are doing it in the best way possible. So through the localization work, we're hoping to build, national capacity of suppliers on the logistics sector, of manufacturers, so that we're able to meet, the needs of children faster and more promptly, and hopefully more efficiently as well.
Sure. I mean, that is really like it's the hard fundamentals. It is the hard fundamentals that need work there. And I will say, to the other point that resonates is just because cargo gets picked up quickly does not mean it'll be delivered quickly. And I think that folks sometimes forget that you do need to make sure that the tail end of the shipment is really set up properly. Otherwise, we just have cargo, on a vessel, we're not actually moving. That's
Absolutely.
great. I'd love to pull up another poll here and shift a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the climate aspects that we have here. So, um, folks, there's a new poll up. So, what percentage of global greenhouse emissions is generated by freight transportation? And this isn't exclusive to humanitarian cargo. This is just the freight industry in general. So that's 1%, 5%, 11%, and 25%. Um, we have a lot of consensus thus far on 11%. Let's see if that changes. It's literally all 100% of you agree that's 11%. Any other folks believe anything else? No. Well, you all have done your research. Okay, 5% and 25%. The answer is 11%. 11%. So it's a huge amount of emissions that we see from global freight transportation. That's air, ocean, and freight trucking. And obviously, this industry, humanitarian cargo, is not immune or left out of that because we are moving cargo via trucks, trains, planes, and ocean vessels. So, Giselle, I'm curious, given the link between transportation emissions and climate change, and that the fact that there is an increasing scale and number of disasters that are linked to climate change, how are you at UNICEF balancing the speed and delivery with environmental sustainability in your shipping operations?
Well, I think that's a very important question. There are short-term and long-term trade-offs that we need to think about when we think about climate and our ability to more immediately respond. I think, for instance, we are currently the largest vaccine buyer in the world, so we have a lot of doses of vaccines that we need to move across the world. But vaccines need to be flown. They require cold chain equipment. So they are not the most sustainable manner for us to actually be able to reach children, right, with these products. And they are not produced everywhere, vaccines. They are produced by a very small number, let's say, of manufacturers globally. And therefore, what is the trade-off, right? Do we vaccinate the child and do we make sure that they grow healthily? Or do we invest in longer term solutions that enable us to actually do the transport of vaccines in a less carbon emission impactful, right? So these are the trade-offs. But Musonda, I think you would like also to pitch in on this, particularly around water and food security. Yeah.
Absolutely, Gisela. I mean, climate change is substantially impacting food and water insecurity. Also, infectious disease outbreaks, malnutrition, displacement. During 2023 alone, a resurgence in cholera led to outbreaks in 29 countries. So, as you have rightly highlighted, climate change is a cause for many of the disasters that we're dealing with. In MENA, we had the floods in Libya, just to name one example. And children are the most vulnerable. Children under the age of 5 shoulder 90% of the global disease burden. But you have highlighted correctly the actions that are being taken, and I can very much testify to that at country level in terms of prepositioning, consolidation, and localization being at the core our sustainable supply response, and really actively attempting or looking to minimize the impact with our strategies. So very much living the localization strategy, trying to secure supplies locally, regionally, essentially in markets that are closer to our beneficiaries, and planning ahead as much as possible to consolidate shipments. We have regional hubs. We're setting up regional hubs really to enable that faster access. We have a regional hub in Jordan now, and of course, we have the global hub in Dubai, really just to bring supplies closer. And of course, the sustainability roadmap, which includes, for example, guidance on packaging. But of course, I mean, emergencies, saving lives overrides all other considerations, and speed is of the essence. As we cannot get away from carbon-intensive air transport, but we can try and minimize it, and we are working actively and deliberately to implement those sustainable responses.
Certainly. So a combination of programmatic and operational interventions there, but ultimately, again, as you said, lives need to be saved now. So, David, I'd love to turn to you there. What is Flexport.org doing to help reduce the climate impact of some of these humanitarian shipments?
Yeah, I mean, given the strong link between climate change and humanitarian disasters, we've always tried to tackle both and keep both in mind. Flexport offers a wide range of climate solutions for all organizations, both commercial clients and nonprofit partners, to help make their supply chains carbon neutral. So we provide a lot of consultation and various things. But for Flexport.org and our disaster relief programs, we've tried to take a little more ownership of the work that we're doing, and we actually pay for the offsets for all of our disaster relief shipments ourselves.
Fantastic. And I think that's a good segue there, because I know, again, we have some folks from the private sector on the webinar. So what role, Gisela and Rosanna, do you see as the private sector playing in reducing shipping costs for aid organizations, for assisting humanitarian agencies such as yourself?
Well, I think a very, very important role. Of course, UNICEF is in the business of children. We are there to serve the children and to make sure that we understand what their needs are. And of course, we do operate in the space of logistics, and we do have technical expertise in-house, and we're working very closely with the private sector. But we really need the private sector to bring about the skill, impactful solutions that are going to enable us to reach those kids faster at a reduced price, so that we have more funding available to actually focus also on the supplies. So we work very much and very closely with the private sector in making sure that we have logistics services globally. But we also work very much closely with the private sector to find innovative solutions to bring about, reduced carbon emissions, reduced costs, reduced time, and many times also in identifying, alternative routes for us to be able to reach the kids.
Again, using that core competence and their expertise there, David, on the flip side, what are some of the things that you're looking for when you're trying to determine what humanitarian agencies, nonprofit organizations to partner with? What are the sort of those key things to you that sort of stand out as the hallmark of a good partner?
Yeah, it's a great question. So to start, is the organization impact focused? Are they mission driven? Certainly. Do our missions align? Do we think we're in lockstep? Are they well run and organized? UNICEF is one of the best organizations we've worked with over the years. I've always been impressed, just top to bottom, how organized they are. And from a logistics perspective, are they reliable in their shipping? Or if they're a little greener or newer to shipping, are they at least collaborative and open to learn and receive guidance? And then finally, probably the most important thing we look for is, do we add value to their supply chain, to their program and missions? Can we help? Does this make sense? Are we doing anything here? So that's really a focus of us as we try to drive impact.
And if I
Certainly.
may I come in, Dave? I want to say that yes, David, you are absolutely supporting us immensely. I think I want to acknowledge, the support of Flexport with contributions in kind, which allowed us to reach 20 countries only in this past year with freight, right? With free freight. So I think this partnership, it's not only about enabling us to do what we do better, but also serving children, right, with us. So huge thanks from our side.
Yeah, we're honored to play the part that we can play to support, what's pretty amazing efforts by UNICEF. So appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm hoping some folks on the call are motivated to get more involved now. So, David, what are other ways that Flexport clients can get involved with humanitarian efforts via Flexport and flexport.org?
Yeah, if you want to get involved, reach out to us. We'd happy to talk about what you can do, how you can support UNICEF and other aid organizations. One obvious way that we provide is our product donations program. So I mentioned this earlier, but if you have excess inventory or just goods you want to donate, we can help connect you with the right nonprofit that needs those supplies and has that gap, and then we can arrange for the shipping. So it's a really awesome way to get involved, whether programs all year round or during a disaster, maybe your employees or your team really cares about a certain emergency or population or crisis, let us know. And then if you're shipping relief supplies yourself, you have a program, you have a charity you're working with, we can either help manage those shipments, of course, or we can at least provide guidance and kind of best practices. So reach out to your dedicated account executive, reach out to your team. We'd be happy to talk and see how we can support.
Fantastic. And Giselle, I'll flip it back to you. How can folks get involved with UNICEF? What are some ways that private sector folks or just individuals can get involved to support your wonderful mission?
Well, the first one, I think it's be a champion for children, right? Talk about children's rights, talk about those kids that do not have access to basic services, basic supplies. So be a champion for them. The second one is that many of you here in this webinar, you are experts in the area that you do, and you can contribute, to our work by offering your expertise and making sure that we are doing whatever we can do in the fastest way possible and in the most cost-effective manner. So we count on your expertise in helping us to do what we do better. And finally, you can always choose also to make a donation if you choose to do so. But I think start with being a champion for children's rights and live that, in your everyday life.
Fantastic. Really inspiring, really impassioned there. And I think too the variety of ways that folks can get involved is just really fantastic. So we're going to turn it over to the Q&A. So reminder, there's a Q&A box. Feel free to put those questions in. We have a few here. I'm going to start with the question to Musunda. So Musunda, what are your biggest challenges operationally ensuring your goals are timely, agile, and cost effective for the transportation of goods that you supply? So again, what are the biggest challenges operationally that you see?
Some of the ones that certainly in the emergencies that we've had to deal with in this region, some of the ones that I highlighted earlier, the unpredictability. I think. I mean, we're being having to very quickly react. And in unstable and insecure environments. While we do and try to do as much preparedness as we possibly can, I will say that we have been caught with these huge emergencies over the past months in particular. So that unpredictability. And then the controls that we have to deal with as well. Being in a very security conscious environment, naturally you will have much more stringent controls, including the customs clearance procedures and such like, including controls to move supplies within countries. So that certainly is one. But I think it's really the unpredictability that makes it complex. I'll add another one, having to deal with multiple parties. So it's just not moving and having to negotiate access almost to some areas. um, also adds to the complexity of it all. So it really is not a case of moving supplies from one place to another. There's so many levels, so much advocacy that needs to happen, so much coordination, persuasion even to move things.
Yeah, really, really difficult environments. I think that that's one of the things, and one of the questions that came into the chat really hit on that well. So, from the overall, I guess, physical safeguarding, what is the biggest pain point right now in the process of safeguarding supply chain of humanitarian aid? Like, what does that look like, particularly in these environments right now, where there is a lot of conflict and a lot of just instability overall, and there is less protection for humanitarian actors? What does that look like from your end, Ms. and Gisela?
So I'll kickstart, and maybe Musonda can complement. I think the first one is access. When a humanitarian crisis happens, and maybe I can recall one specific one, which was the Ukraine. We had supplies by the border to meet the needs of displaced populations in less than 72 hours. But we needed to negotiate access with the government and with the parties that would enable us to actually enter with convoys into the country and be able then to assist, the displaced populations. So I think that's the first one. A very important principles guide our work in humanitarian. The first one is that we are non-partisan and non-political at all. Our focus should be only on the children. And in order for us to be able to negotiate this access to deliver the supplies for children, these principles of humanitarian support are absolutely essential. Yeah. Then, of course, we do have a very robust logistics team, and maybe I'll hand over to Musonda. But whenever we're figuring out these routes in very tense and complicated humanitarian crisis, we have a whole range of experts from security to logistics, figuring out what are the best routes for us to be able to reach these kids. But Musonda, I'll hand it over to you. Because you have a lot of experience on this, and you work quite closely on that, particularly in the region you lead.
Indeed, Gisela, access definitely number one. I mean, the supplies are pre-positioned, but access takes a huge chunk of the effort that is put into moving supplies from one to the other. But also the team itself on the ground. The welfare of the team on the ground, and we recognizing that the teams themselves are in their emergency and dealing with the issues on a personal level. So also maintaining that level of um, ensuring that level of care and concern as well. I think another thing we're very conscious of and actively trying to work on is that coordination and collaboration with other actors on the ground, other partners on the ground, to ensure the best use of the resources that we are providing, avoiding duplication of efforts, and really making sure that we have as far a reach as possible. But for sure, access is the biggest challenge, and we have cases. Ongoing cases, ongoing situations, Palestine, Sudan, where this has been a huge hurdle and continues to be.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things that it can be easily lost in the media when there's advocacy for access, is the fact that somebody physically needs to drive the truck into
Yes.
that area, and then you need a team to actually distribute, and those folks are going to be in harm's way unless that safe access is guaranteed.
Yeah.
Which is why you do see so many of these joint calls by UN agencies, by the other folks in the humanitarian sector, saying we just need safe access because we have the goods. As you said, we have the goods at the border, and their supplies are ready to go. We can get the things into child's hands or the parents' hands, but we physically can't get there safely, and we can't put folks at risk. So, I think for folks on the call, that is something to keep in mind when you do hear about humanitarian access. Really think Supplies are there; they're ready to go.
Yeah.
Aid workers just can't get them to the folks in need. We have some really great technical ones here. Some really great questions here technically. We talked about a little about localization. Well, a good bit about localization. And so somebody here really understands procurement here. So they asked basically, would you be interested to? They would be interested to hear more about the Q&A framework for procuring medical products, and particularly how do you do that with the push to localization to make sure that they are up to standard and they are safe. Right up your alley here, Gisela.
Great question. Great question. So, in UNICEF, for all medical products, we actually work under the normative role of the World Health Organization. So, all vaccines and medicines, they need to pass a pre-qualification, very thorough and robust process before we're able to procure any of those vaccines and medicines. So you recall, many of us still recall that we went through a global pandemic and we had to procure COVID-19 vaccines. So WHO actually worked very fast to give the pre-qualification or the emergency listing for those COVID-19 vaccines so that we're able to procure. So we work under absolutely under the umbrella of WHO. But having said that, we also have a quality assurance department and supply division that actually does inspections of manufacturers around the world, making sure that they are meeting the requirements in terms of quality standards for UNICEF, and they do that on a regular basis. And we also have mechanisms to report any issues with a product. So, for instance, it may be that a product is consistency is not, in line with the quality standards. These things are reported through UNICEF, and then in our collaboration with WHO, we're going to address with the manufacturer that particular product. It has been very seldom that we have had to recall any of the products because of the robust, quality assurance controls that we have in place.
Fantastic. I mean, really, again, supply chain, right? We are starting from the base procurement process all the way through delivery to some of the most complex environments. And so it's really phenomenal, the scale and the scope of what UNICEF handles. We're going to pivot here a little bit, but David, we have a great question here regarding what airlines and forwarders can do. We talked that good bit about that, about the need for the private sector and for all of that operational and expertise and support there. So the question is, how can airlines and forwarders make end-to-end humanitarian aid processes more efficient? Are there any example of challenges where their input has caused challenges themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. We talked a bit about this, but obviously, like collaboration and coordination is so key, given all the parties involved and what you're trying to do. Our approach has been, to try to leverage our technology to give more visibility, and then bring groups together so they can collaborate on the same shipments and the same projects and see what's going on and have that data to see where things are and get real-time notifications so they can be faster at responding to challenges. For charter shipments, we see this a lot where there are lots of parties involved. You could have lots of different nonprofits who are providing cargo that we're all shipping together on one plane, going to one consignee who's importing it. You need to make sure you have all the documents, the timing is right across the board. So giving that visibility really helps with that coordination. And outside of using technology, just having a real clear plan in place in advance to make sure you avoid points of failure and you can move more efficiently. Another thing we've seen that's been really helpful, that we've seen more on the air side as opposed to kind of the ocean side, but prioritizing humanitarian cargo and giving discounted pricing. Hugely effective, right? Certainly bringing down costs allows us to move more quickly, procure more supplies, but making sure those get priority. We've seen this with various airlines for Ukraine and other emergencies. Hopefully we'll see more of it going forward because it's just massively helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point there is just, again, we hammered home the core competency, what do they do? And I think the airlines have done a really great job of understanding that they are critical in these times and that they do have capacity. There are other forwarders, other parcel companies that do such similar things. So again, to the private sector folks, like what do you do? What do you do well? And then work with agencies and humanitarian organizations to really figure out like what is that overlap where I can contribute. during a time of need. So great answer there, David. We're going to have time for one more question, it looks like. So, Gisela, can you talk a bit more about UNICEF efforts at mapping import processes? Is that something you're doing with other organizations? What does that look like? It's obviously a huge task if you're working in 190 countries to understand
Yeah.
that globally. What does that look like for you?
So yeah, so definitely. I mean, UNICEF doesn't do things alone and by ourselves. We have to collaborate with others, right? And in this case, we're working with the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation and also with the World Customs Organization. And with them, we are mapping the import processes with a view to simplify, digitalize, and with a view, of course, to making sure that those supplies are getting into the country in a faster manner. I think there was also a question on whether we're doing this only for vaccines. We're doing first for health commodities, because these are the ones that are of larger scale. And therefore there would be a bigger impact if we're able to optimize these processes of importation. But the intent is, of course, to be able to apply them for all other commodities. Also important to say that, of course, health-related commodities have to comply with the national regulatory processes and requirements, and that's why it's so important that we simplify these processes to the best and most optimal manner in order to get the supplies in country and ready to be able to be distributed, right, for kids and for children. Yeah.
Fantastic. Again, one of those very straightforward, relatively, but incredibly difficult, incredibly time consuming. And then once you get actual down to the regulatory level for each country, very complex. So a phenomenal and massive effort, I'm sure. We want to thank everybody today for joining us. I think the key points that I have to take away are one, just the fact that we do see such a huge increase in the number of crises that are impacting folks around the world globally, particularly children who are always the most susceptible, most vulnerable, and so we need to do a lot of work here to protect them. The fact that disaster logistics are just like other logistics, but incredibly more complex and a lot of unpredictability because we don't know where or when these disasters will strike, and we just need to operate in far more areas. But we can resolve that a little bit with our collaboration, communication, our agility in order to effectively manage the supply chain efforts. And lastly, we need to really make sure that folks in the private sector are getting involved. So a lot of work here to be done, but phenomenal conversation. So Gisela, Misan, and David, thank you so much for joining us. To all of our guests, thank you so much for joining us. Again, please reach out, please donate, continue to support these wonderful initiatives, and we'll talk to you all soon.